Hi, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about Chapter 5 in your textbook, Getting to Know Your Diverse Workplace. We're going to start with talking about organizational assimilation, then talk about organizational culture. Then we're going to define some diversity-related concepts and talk about how they're relevant in business and professional settings. We'll talk about some pro-diversity behaviors in the workplace as well to end the lecture. So starting off with organizational assimilation. Organizations actually begin to assimilate you into their culture before you're even hired. So the recruitment process, from the way the job posting is written to the signing of the contract, that all contributes to your socialization in an organization. Once you're hired, you step out into the fantasy world and into the reality of your new organizational culture. Every organization, large or small, has its own culture. And as a new member of an organizational culture, you will be formally and informally taught the acceptable ways to think and behave. So this is all called the assimilation process, which is the adjustment period and settling in that's common for anyone starting a new job. The assimilation process is actually part of a much larger process that we call socialization, which are all the experiences that shape your attitudes, perceptions, emotions, and communication choices. This is very, very related to work, our perceptions of what we want to do and what work in general should be come from a variety of sources in our life, beginning at early childhood. So our parents, other family members, education, friends, media, all of those things and many more contribute to the socialization and what we think work should be, and therefore how effectively we will assimilate in any given organizational culture. So now we'll talk about organizational culture, but let's first start by defining culture. So in our textbook, it's defined as the rules of living and functioning in a society. Like I said, from the day you were born, your parents, siblings, relatives, friends, teachers, and even strangers have been working to socialize you into the culture or cultures that make up their experiences. And these can be work or non-work related. Organizational culture is the way an organization operates, the attitudes employees have, and the overall tone and approach to any given business. Learning an organization's culture provides you with the information necessary to evaluate the audience and context given in your place of work. So you can't effectively step back and reflect on your communication behaviors without taking into account the organizational culture in which it occurred. A bunch of things make up and reflect this organizational culture, like organization's mission statements, any orientation that you go through, the hierarchy in the organization, even the office locations of people within that hierarchy, the overall environment, technology used in the organization, decor, dress, metaphors and stories that people tell about the organization, jargon used in an organization, rituals like office Christmas parties and birthday celebrations and things like that, and also what behavior is rewarded in the organization. All of those things reflect and help to build and solidify organizational culture. So we talked a little bit in previous chapters about some of the uncertainties that newcomers have when they enter organizations. And a big part of that is that they're trying to learn the culture. So we're going to briefly talk about some tactics to reduce newcomer uncertainty. The first of which is overt questioning. So this is just directly asking questions about information that you don't know about in the organization. There's also indirect questioning, in which you're kind of like, I wish I knew how to do blah, 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 blah. Hope you're not directly asking for the information, but you're phrasing your statements in a way that you're hoping someone will give you that information. There's also third-party questioning. Like, for example, if you don't want to go to your boss to ask a question because you're afraid of looking incompetent for not knowing something, or you're just trying to save face and not like bother your boss, you can ask a coworker who might know the answer instead. There's also testing limits. So this is kind of just trying to figure out what behaviors are acceptable in your organization and what are not. An example of this would be like swearing to your boss or your coworkers and just kind of seeing how they react to you using curse words in the business and professional environment. Another one is disguising conversation. So if you're just talking about something, hoping as if you kind of know what you're talking about, hoping that whoever you are interacting with provides more information. For example, if you compliment someone on how efficient they are at a filing procedure or something, maybe they'll tell you about how they do it. And finally, there's also surveillance, which is just trying to learn by watching others and what they do in the organization. So now we're going to get into the diversity-related concepts that this chapter introduced. All of these things we're going to talk about are super, super important. I can't stress they're important enough. I could teach a whole class on this stuff, but unfortunately, we only have one chapter to talk about it. So I'm going to try to do it justice. So we'll start with cultural diversity awareness. And this is just generally being aware of diversity that's present in any work or social environment. We can't be respectful and demonstrate cultural competence without first being aware that diversity exists and that it's important. Related to this is worldview, or a culture's orientation to supernatural, human, and natural entities and the cosmological universe and other philosophical issues influencing how its members see the world. So a lot of things contribute to worldview, and it's different for every individual, but experiences within ourselves, with others, gender differences, us versus them mentalities, like in-group, out-group relationships, religious difference, various ways people manage time, like either being very fast-paced or more relaxed, and spirituality. Worldview is actually a big part of what contributes to our biases that we talked about from chapter 3, listening. We often assume that our own worldview is the same or very similar to everyone around us. And this is how we form those biases, because we get confused sometimes when we see people or cultures that operate different from ours. And we tend to be very ethnocentric and think that ours is the best and the right way to just be and view and operate in the world. But that is not necessarily true. There are many, many ways that are just as great and wonderful as our own way of just existing and being in the world, as well as business and professional settings. So now we'll talk about some pro-diversity behaviors in the workplace. I mentioned cultural competence already, but let's take a moment to define what that means. So cultural competence is the level of knowledge that a person has about others who differ in some way in comparison with him or herself. So having some sort of different worldview. A culturally competent professional individual not only has knowledge of the difference, but is also striving to learn more and always be respectful and celebrate that difference, because it is a very good thing. A way that we can kind of build our cultural competency is to engage in perception checking, which is asking others if one's perception or sense of understanding something is correct or incorrect. And this can be kind of tricky, because even though demonstrating that curiosity is a good thing, it's important to consider the way you do this and go about formulating these messages to engage in perception checking. So even if your intention of one is one of respect, the way you communicate messages regarding difference and trying to understand difference can make or break you as a professional, and just as like someone trying to be a good human being in the world. And it can tarnish your journey toward excellence, both professionally and personally. So we always want to demonstrate mutual respect, which is seeking understanding through the vehicle of open dialogue and attempting to understand others with an open mind. When all of these things are absent, the three things that we're talking about on this slide, this is when discrimination becomes more likely to occur in the workplace by excluding people or denying them products, rights, and services based on their religion, race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation, or disability. So this all highlights the importance of cultural sensitivity training, tolerance for difference, and even more than tolerance, appreciation for all of the great things about being in a diverse workplace and world and society. We're also going to go over some examples of diversity in professional contexts. The first is that we're going to talk about is gender. Your textbook is a little naughty here, and it's very binary and just talks about men and women, but we all know that there's more than two genders. So that is a big thing to be mindful of in the workplace. And you can even see how this bias creeps into the authors of your textbook, because they only talk about gender as being man or woman. There's also ethnicity and race. And even though race is a social construct, it has very real implications as it subjects minority groups of people to adverse social situations. Ethnicity is a little bit different. It's a shared history, shared identity, shared geography, or shared culture. But with both of these, we want to avoid stereotyping. We talked about that normal human process of categorization in chapter 3. It's inherent in us as humans. It's a survival mechanism. It's how we know green means go and red means stop. So it's very natural, but we have to correct for it actively, especially in the workplace, to avoid those yucky byproducts like stereotyping. So you have to actively correct for those processes to achieve cultural competence, and engage in very pro-social perspective taking and demonstrate mutual respect. There's also language, and this can be accent, dialect, and sometimes we experience language barriers, but we can use translation services sometimes to overcome those barriers. There's also religion and spirituality, physical or neurological atypicality, age, sexual orientation, height and weight, socioeconomic status, and veteran status. So just to recap, we started off talking about organizational assimilation, and how it's part of a larger socialization process that kind of tells us who we are and what we think work should be like and our role in the workplace. Then we talked about culture, and organizational culture, and some of the tactics to reduce newcomer uncertainty as they enter new organizational cultures. We defined some diversity-related concepts like cultural diversity awareness and worldview. And then we talked about how to demonstrate pro-diversity beliefs and behaviors in the workplace by developing our cultural competency, engaging in perception checking, and always demonstrating mutual respect for all of the ways that we can encounter diverse individuals in professional contexts. So that is all for this chapter, and I will see you in the videos next week.